Kal Halal Yahweh Shem Shai Shem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles of Great Millstone. Peace and salutations to all the Akim and the bishops and the elders pushing this word in truth and sincerity. I'm going to continue with this reading. This will be the last reading of Vultures and Eagles Clothing. So let's get straight into it. In the previous section, I developed an account of legal populism that, in line with recent scholarship on conspiracy theory, sympathized with its impulses of resistance towards various forms of domination in everyday American life. In this section, I develop a more skeptical account, one that focuses on the legal populist not as everyman, but as occupying a very particular niche in the American class and race hierarchy. We may start again with Hofstadter, who argues that the paranoid styles of politics emerges when struggles over status opposed to internal interests of politics emerge when struggles over status as opposed to interests consume the public sphere. So let's read that sentence again. We may start again with Hofstadter, who argues that the paranoid style of politics emerges when struggles over status as opposed to interests consume the public sphere. The paranoid style, he suggests, is mobilized by social conflicts that involve ultimate schemes of values and that bring fundamental fears and hatreds rather than negotiable interests into political action. Hofstadter specifies the issues with which status politics has traditionally been concerned. First is the problem of American identity, as it is complicated by our immigrant origins and problems of ethnic minorities. Second, the problem of social status, defined as the capacity of various groups and occupations to command personal deference in society. And finally, the effort of Americans of diverse cultural and moral persuasions to win reassurance that their values are respected by the community at large. Hofstadter's view that interest politics represents the norm and status politics, the exception, is of course subject to debate. His link between status politics and the paranoid style, however, has been reaffirmed by many others. Peter Knight, for example, associates conspiracy theory with an American nationalism that relies on narratives of ascriptive identity, specifically narratives of white supremacy. The question of who is genuinely American and who is not, a question that has played out in the theatre of race since D.W. Griffin's Birth of a Nation, lies at the center of both patriot ideology and the literature of disaster on which survivalist fantasies thrive. Take, for example, one of the seminal texts in the literature of disaster and survivalism. The Turner Diaries by Andrew MacDonald, pseudonym for William Pierce, leader of the neo-Nazi National Alliance. The Turner Diaries describe the activities of a racist, anti-Semitic underground movement called The Order, which through a series of violent acts during the 1990s gained power in the United States and eventually the world. Fallen at the most overtly racist end of spectrum of American disaster fiction, the Turner Diaries and its author have figured in a number of real-life rebellions against the United States government in the name of a new political legal order. In the mid-1980s, for example, Robert J. Matthews founded an order of his own composed of several men who committed a string of robberies and bombings and finally murdered to talk show host Alan Berg. After informants passed information about Matthews' activities and whereabouts to federal authorities, Matthews and three companies were isolated on Whidbey Island, north of Seattle, in Puget Sound, and killed at the end of a 36-hour gun battle with the FBI in December 1984. According to Morris Dees, founder of Southern Poverty Law Center, William Pierce, author of the novel that apparently inspired Matthews to action, said this about Matthews' revolutionary career. Bob gave us a very important symbol. He did what was morally right. He may have been a bit premature, and he may have made many tactical errors, but he reminded us we are not engaged in a debate between gentlemen. Bob elevated our struggle. He took us from name-calling to bloodletting. He cleared the air for all of us. In the long run, that will be helpful. So ultimately, they're praising the lords of this Matthews. Let's continue. Mitchell notes that wreaths were laid at the gate where Matthews died. Thus, fantasies of apocalyptic violence occasionally erupt into reality. Not only Matthews, but also other members of self-styled patriots groups killed by Not only Matthews, but also other members of self-styled patriot groups killed by the United States government have seen their deaths celebrated as martyrdom. The shooting by the FBI of Randy Weaver and his family in Ruby Ridge in 1992, and of David Koresh and his flock in Waco, Texas in 1993. For example, confirmed the importance of the cause to sympathetic onlookers and made clear to them that even greater violence would be necessary to destroy Zog. That's the Zionists. That's short for Zionists of government, overthrow government, something of that nature. Let me go back up. It's a slur. The word Zog, the term Zog, is a slur against the Zionists that have taken power of the American judicial system and the whole system as a whole. 2 years to the day after the Waco assault, at 9:01 a.m. on April 19, 1995, a rental truck packed with fertilizer mixed with diesel fuel exploded outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. The blast killed 168 people, including 19 children, in an on-site daycare center. Until the destruction of the World Trade Center Twin Towers on September 11, 2001, the Oklahoma City bombing was the deadliest terror attack in United States history. About an hour and a half after the explosion, Timothy McVeigh was arrested for not having a license tag and for being in possession of a weapon. He was wearing a T-shirt which had on its front a picture of Abraham Lincoln and the words of Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth. On the back of the T-shirt was the famous quote from Thomas Jefferson. So, Timothy McVeigh. So let's go back. So Timothy McVeigh was arrested for not having a license tag and for being in possession of a weapon. He was wearing a T-shirt which had on its front a picture of Abraham Lincoln and the words of Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth, "Sic semper fi tyrannis." Let's look what that means. Sic semper fi tyrannis. Sic semper tyrannis. Sic semper tyrannis is a Latin phrase meaning "thus always to tyrants." It suggests that bad but justified outcomes should should or eventually will befall tyrants. So it's a foreshadowing almost. McVeigh, an Oklahoma military veteran, although not a member of any organization, reportedly held a number of right wing views and was particularly agitated about the conduct of the federal government in Waco after visiting the site. McVeigh expressed extreme anger at the federal government and advised that the government should never have done what it did. McVeigh was convicted on June 2nd, 1997, under federal law for the murder of 8 federal employees who died in the explosion. The jury recommended that McVeigh receive the death penalty. The Supreme Court upheld the murder convictions, and McVeigh was executed on June 11, 2001, by lethal injection at the United States Federal Prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. It was the first execution of a convicted criminal by the federal government of the United States since the execution of Victor Fuego in Iowa on March 15, 1963. The fertilizer diesel fuel mixture used as the incendiary device in the Oklahoma City bombings closely resembled a similar mixture described in some detail in the Turner Diaries. Again, Pierce offered his post hoc commentary, although with more caution and fewer complimentary words than he had offered about Matthews. Pierce acknowledged that someone may have read the book, which he termed a possible inspiration, and predicted that there would be further acts like the attack, but he opined that what happened in Oklahoma made little political sense because it was not sustained. One day, Pierce insisted, there will be great organized terrorism aimed at bringing down the government. It is wrong, therefore, to read legal populism only as the voice of every man's struggle against the forces of contemporary domination. This voice of resistance adopts a very particular subject position: white, radical, and Christian. Both its radical tendencies and its openly avowed whiteness apparently set it apart from the American political mainstream. In this section, however, I will argue that the political attitudes of legal populism are not as far from those of political elites as it might first appear. In its anti-government energies, it claims to an originalist understanding of the canonical legal texts and political traditions of the United States and its felt sense of betrayal and disenfranchisement. Legal populism is allied closely with many powerful voices, and in this way serves as a commentary on the political mainstream rather than as its antithesis. Legal populism, virulent hatred of the federal government, perhaps the movement's most obviously radical feature, is nevertheless in sympathy with political legal agendas being pursued by right-wing elites. Economist and New York Times columnist Paul Krugman, for instance, has suggested that the aim of the Bush II administration is to drive the federal government as we know it out of existence, and with it all traces of the Great Society welfare state. With respect to law, Frank Fouds argues that for many right-wing activists, all constitutional and administrative law since the New Deal is suspect. The aim of what the right repeatedly refers to as the culture wars is to accomplish a kind of cultural cleansing that in the course of events will leave the purified society looking and feeling like the 1780s as much as politically and physically possible. Similarly, the legal populists' love for the common law can be seen as in solidarity with the right-wing elites' jurisprudential efforts to revive the private law jurisprudence. Jurisprudence. Let's look at that word, jurisprudence. The theory or philosophy of law. So let's read that again. Similarly, the legal populists' love for the common law can be seen as in solidarity with the right-wing elite's jurisprudential efforts to revive the private law jurisprudence of the 19th century. Critical legal scholar J. Feynman argues that property, contract, and tort law are undergoing a quite classical revival in which the central jurisprudential developments of the 20th century are being rolled back. J. Feynman describes the 19th century vision that has been revised thus: the substantive vision of classical legal thought is a world of independent individuals, each of whom acts within a broad sphere of legal autonomy to pursue his own self-interest. The role of government is precisely defined and narrowly circumscribed. Let's look at that. So within limits. So J. Feynman described the 19th century vision that is being revived as thus: the substantive vision of classical legal thought is a world of independent individuals, each of whom acts within a broad sphere of legal autonomy to pursue his own self-interest. The role of government is precisely defined and narrowly circumscribed. The legislature has limited authority to regulate narrowly and traditionally defined harmful activities. The courts, applying a complete, coherent, and formal body of law, police the boundaries of legislative authority and define the ground rules for interaction among private individuals, namely the rules of contract, tort, and property. So it sounds like a very authoritative, what's that word? Like a strict regime, authoritative measures. What we're seeing now, where it's like censorship of speech, like, for example, the whole thing that has been happening over the last 2 years, the censorship of that, what you can say online, what you can post online, and even now, as we speak, the past 2 days, Russia entering Ukraine to take over that territory once again. Thoughts on that are being restricted online as well. So this is basically alluding to what we're seeing now. As you know, this was written in 2005. It's basically talking about a government which basically censors speech. Like Fouts, Feynman argues that the classical revival is driven by right-wing ideology. For Feynman, however, the transformation of private law is driven by a vision of laissez-faire capitalism. The master narrative of the vision of market centrality is Riangesque. I don't know what that. Let's look at. I'll have to type that up. Riagnesque. Resembling or characteristics of a Reagan. Oh, right. So it's alluding to Reagan, Ronald Reagan. So the master narrative of the vision of market centrality is Reaganesque. Once upon a time, there was a golden age when a man, always a man, could stand on his own 2 feet, his rights inviolate. Individual liberty, personal responsibility, and economic opportunity were the foundations of American life. Society was organized and controlled by two institutions, the market and the state. The market was primary, though through it people could maximize their potential, realize their dreams, and rise or fall on their own merits. The state was subordinate beyond its minimal functions of guaranteeing physical security, providing public goods, and protecting individual rights. Government offered only the possibility of unwise and pernicious interference in the social order created by the market. Pernicious, let's look up that word. Pernicious. Having a harmful effect, especially in a gradual or subtle way. So let's read that again. The market was primary. Through it, people could maximize their potential, realize their dreams, and rise or fall on their own merits. The state was subordinate beyond its minimal functions of guaranteeing physical security, providing public goods, and protecting individual rights. Government offered only the possibility of unwise and pernicious interference in the social order created by the market. The vision of a dramatically shrunken public sphere and a correspondingly robust private sphere is not the only thing legal populists and right-wing elites share. In their commitment to originalist readings of canonical American legal texts, the legal populists are also not as marginal as they might initially seem. As Thomas Gray observes, a new formalism has recently emerged among legal scholars and jurists related to the current ascendance of right-wing elites. Gray defines the new formalism as consisting of four tendencies: a preference for rules over standards, textualism, emphasis on plain meaning in legal interpretation, originalism, emphasis on original understanding, and conceptualism. And the last one, and conceptualism, emphasis on the importance of principle and coherence in doctrine and adjudication. The most famous proponent of the new formalism is Justice Antonin Scalia of the United States Supreme Court. So the most famous proponent of new formalism is Justice Antonin Scalia. What's that? Antonin sounds like Latin again. Scalia. Antonin Scalia was an American jurist who served as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. So let's read that again. The most famous proponent of the new formalism is Justice Antonin Scalia of the United States Supreme Court. Scalia's written decisions, speeches, and essays are characterized by a willingness to overturn long settled precedent on the basis of historical evidence about the original or plain meaning of texts. Scalia's textual originalism is taken to its limits by legal populists for whom most of the official law since the original constitution is illegitimate. Though they differ greatly in degree, the formalist textual method and the legal populist textual method share what Mitchell and Levin, drawing on the work of Sanford Levinson, describe as a Protestant approach to interpretation. The Protestant tradition states that the source of the doctrine is the constitutional text alone. The authoritative interpretation is based on the legitimacy of individualized or at least non-hierarchical communal interpretation. The second position, labeled the Catholic tradition, holds that constitutional interpretation should be based on the Constitution plus unwritten tradition. Under the Catholic position, the Supreme Court is the dispenser of ultimate interpretation. Common law theory insists on the authority of individual interpretation of the constitutional text, but is distinctive in how it approaches the authority of the original text and the use of supplementary texts. While common law theorists draw upon a number of other documents beyond the Constitution, including the Magna Carta, Articles of Confederation, Federalist Papers, Northwest Ordinance, Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Let's go back up. Find my page again. Kentucky resolutions. Kentucky resolutions sees laws, constitutional or otherwise, as deals among self-interested actors. It is usually skeptical of all efforts. So they're talking about Kentucky resolutions. While common law, let's go back up. So while common law theorists draw upon a number of other documents beyond the Constitution, including the Magna Carta, Articles of Confederation, Federalist Papers, Northwest Ordinance, Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, sees laws constitutional or otherwise as deals among self-interested actors. It is usually skeptical of all efforts to reason about social and economic problems. It disparages such efforts as a mere mask for self-interests or as incapable of resolving social and political disputes, which it treats as based on premises too fixed and incommensurable to a subject of deliberation. Resolution is possible only by warfare or compromise among self-interested bargainers. Disagreements about ethical and political problems are not an occasion for shared reasoning, but instead proof of its impossibility. Value judgments understood as prejudices are the consequence. If we depart from the enterprise of tracing legal outcomes directly to a legitimating decision, usually an exercise of force, we will fall into the chaos of evaluation, something on which there are deep cleavages in society. No judge can claim the ability or the warrant to say anything about those cleavages. let's continue. So, English Common Law and Black's Law Dictionary. They deliberately disregard a large part of the American constitutional and legal tradition, particularly the 14th Amendment, court rulings from 1937 to the present, and congressional legislation from 1933 to the present. Common law theory is thus a modified but relatively pure form of Protestant interpretation in which theorists use those texts which passed into their canon in a literalist fashion and discard all texts which do not meet their ideological standards as either non-existent or as evidence of the illegitimacy of the government of that time. Finally, legal populism rhetoric of political disenfranchisement, dispossession, and resentment can also be understood as a property held in common with the new right and with neoconservatism, neoconservatism, neoconservatism. So let's read that again. Finally, legal populism rhetoric of political disenfranchisement, dispossession, and resentment can also be understood as a property held in common with the new right and with neoconservatism. So let's look up that word, neoconservatism. Neoconservatism, commitment to traditional values and ideas with opposition to change or innovation. So neoconservatists are old school, so to speak. As Vultures argues, contemporary right-wing elites see themselves engaged in a Colton camp which crystallized in the 1980s in the cultural wars. Colton camp, what's that? Sounds German. Kultur Kampf. Kulturkampf is German for culture struggle. So let's read that again. As Vaud argues, contemporary right-wing elites see themselves engaged in a culture struggle which crystallized in the 1980s in the culture wars concerning the teaching of the humanities canon in American universities, and has since focused on the protection of the so-called family values. So the family values were being challenged in the American universities. It would be funny to see, it would be interesting to see how those people would react to what is being taught today in the schools, what has been pushed not on university students, but young kids as young as 5 years old, having drag queens in their classrooms, or the whole alphabet community, the LGBTQ community in their schools, schooling them about sexual lusts, sodomy, anal sex. This is the kind of thing which has been taught to young children in kindergarten. So it's a big jump from here, the 1980s. These were university students who were arguing about infringement on the doctrine of family values, whereas now the whole thought of family, the whole structure of family values, or the way it's been taught, has changed. It's not so more. It's less more about the whole 2.4 children, white picket fence. It's more so about liberty, freedom, work for the weekend, live for the weekend, do as you will, carpe diem, you know, these kind of mantras. So I'll continue. Both the culture wars and family values campaigns like the angry white male anti affirmative action backlash of the 1980s have been characterized by the conviction that traditional Americans are today hemmed in and threatened by politicized identity politics to the extent that they not traditionally subordinated groups have become the truly dispossessed. This sense of disenfranchisement is vividly echoed in the literature of legal populism. By no objective political or economic measure can those who speak in the voice of the angry white male or in the shorthand of the November 2004 presidential election, that's the narrator's own spin on this matter. I don't, it's neither here nor there. I'll read that again. By no objective political or economic measure can those who speak in the voice of the angry white male or the red states be described as dispossessed or subordinated. Yet, rhetorically speaking, the transparent white American has certainly been unsettled, forced to publicly justify himself by insurgent identity groups who have successfully made whiteness visible and questioned the unthinking identification of white supremacy and the American nation. This transformation is indeed symbolically threatening, even if the material distribution of power and wealth has not changed. The free-floating anxiety represented by the conspiracy narratives of legal populism seem to draw at times on the energies of political resentment that similarly fueled the current attack on same-sex marriage and fueled earlier attacks on affirmative action and feminism. In this context, legal populism's stories of the theft of law and the possibility of escape from the government grid, the founding of new American republics, and the claiming of sovereign citizenship are creative and romantic metaphors to express a sense of betrayal and disenfranchisement, emotions that in turn represent a real political loss. From this perspective, even legal populism, even legal populism's peculiar appeals to sovereign citizenship are more mainstream than they might first appear. The unself-conscious pro-whiteness in these narratives, through jarring in contemporary political discourse, was once unproblematic. In his famous dissent in Plessy versus Ferguson, Justice Harlan wrote, "The white race deems itself to be the dominant race in this country, and so it is, in prestige, in achievements, in education, in wealth, and in power. So I doubt not it will continue to be for all time, if it remains true to its great heritage and holds fast to the principles of constitutional liberty." So that person has says that, it will continue. There's a scripture for that. That's Psalms 49 and 11. Their inward thought is that their houses shall continue forever, and their dwelling places to all generations. They call their lands after their own names. So that was what that last that last paragraph represented. The person was Placey versus Ferguson. So I'll read that again. In his famous dissent in Placey versus Ferguson, Justice Harlan wrote, "The white race deems itself to be the dominant race in the country, and so it is, in prestige, in achievements, in education, in wealth, and in power. So I doubt not it will continue to be for all time if it remains true to its great heritage and holds fast to the principles of constitutional liberty." And it's ironic because that constitutional liberty is actually what turned it on its head, because this was written so many years ago. That paper, Placey versus Ferguson, would have been written maybe in the 80s or 90s, and a lot has changed from then. And the unveiling of white supremacy and just even white existence, so-called white existence, is it's under the microscope at the moment. It has been, but it's ever increasing. So it is the loss of this heritage and this liberty that legal populism longs for in the name of a sovereign citizenry that contemporary governance has betrayed, as David William observes. The over-racists have adopted an incisive strategy for constituting a people in late 20th century America. The militia writers solved the problem of diversity among the citizens by defining the citizenry to include only those like them. That strategy has a certain historical resonance. 18th century civic republicanism could post the existence of a common good because it restrictively defined the citizenry. And if it were normatively defensible, that strategy might still work. White conservative Christians, even today, might have enough commonality to constitute a people and to possess a common good. So let's read that again. 18th century civic republicanism could posit the existence of a common good because it restrictively defined the citizenry. And if it were normatively defensible, that strategy might still work. White conservative Christians, even today, might have enough commonality to constitute a people and to possess a common good, which is false. That would never happen. There's, as the scriptures say, there's an enmity between the people. They're never going to accept or self-willingly constitute a people, another people. So, indeed, some observers argue that white conservative Christians in the Bush second administration are preparing for just such a victory of homogeneity represented by the rapture they believe to be imminent. The rapture is nowhere in the Bible. That's just a Christian fable. And when I say Christian, I'm talking about Christian as in the false doctrine which has been spread across the globe since the 1500s, or since the new rebirth of the so-called Caucasian. I'm not talking about the real Christians who are Israelites, who were labeled Christians first in Antioch. You'll find that in the book of Acts. So let's continue. Despite the many affinities between legal populism and some right-wing elite agendas, however, legal populism ultimately puts its faith in self-help rather than representative government. This suggests to me a fundamental difference between the two movements. The, the constituency to which legal populism speaks is not a constituency which fears the loss of its privileges. It is a constituency which has never experienced those privileges except by way of nostalgia. Even its open appeal to witness comes less from anti-black animus. Animus, what's that? Animus. Hostility or ill feeling. Animus. So, so a constituency which has never experienced those privileges except by way of nostalgia. Even its open appeal to whiteness comes less from anti-black feeling than from an unself-conscious nostalgia for a pre-Reconstruction world, a nation of citizens that would hold property in land and in a common heritage such that they would have no need for equality, only liberty. Howard Winant's taxonomy of racial projects in contemporary American politics distinguishes 5 such projects: far right, new right, neoconservative, neoliberal, and new abolitionist. Abolitionist. Within the far right, Winant identifies 2 ideological strands which he names fascist and neo-fascist. On the far right, the cornerstone of white identity is belief in an ineluctable, let's look up that word, ineluctable. So ineluctable means unable to be resisted or avoided. So on the far right, the cornerstone of white identity is belief in an ineluctable, unilateral, racialized difference between whites and non-whites. Unilateral. Unalterable. Not able to be changed. So, difference between whites and non-whites. Explicitly, fascist groups on the far right openly admire Nazi race thinking, fantasize about racial genocide, and dream of establishing an all-white North American nation, or failing that, seceding from the United States to establish such a nation, possibly in the Northwest. Winant places Pierce and Christian identity in this category. Neo-fascism's response has been political mobilization on racial grounds. If blacks have their organizations and movements, why shouldn't whites? The various activities of David Duke exemplify the new trend. His electoral campaigns, his attempts at student organization, for example, his effort to create white student unions on college campuses, and his emblematic National Association for the Advancement of White People. Wyden distinguishes both these elements of the far right from what he terms the new right, which was born with the Republican Southern strategy and its successful capture of white backlash against the civil rights movement, and which prefers not to openly claim a white identity. If explicit references to white pride distinguish the far right from the new right, then legal populist narratives like that of sovereign citizenship would seem to constitute a far right racial project. But in contrast with the anti-black resentment mobilized by the Duke campaign, sovereign citizenship seems preoccupied with whiteness. Do you see this? Do you see how many times just in that? I'm just going to pause from reading, continue with the reading, but just from that, the last, let's say, minute of reading, do you see how many times white and black was used? Now multiply that over many days, many months, many years of newscasters talking about white news stories and black news stories. Do you see what that does to the psyche? And how ridiculous it is when you see someone of the people which they describe every day right in front of your face. You can see them with brown skin, even they might even be wearing something which is black on them, and you still continue to call them black. Do you see how ridiculous, how indoctrined everyone is? I even remember the first time, because I've got a good memory. I even remember the first time when I heard the term black. I must have been about, it was in school. I must have been about maybe, I'm not too sure. I was probably about 5 or 6. I'd never come across it in nursery or anything like that. I specifically remember it. I can see the faces and everything. And I remember the kids saying, "Oh yeah, you are black," and the teacher saying, "Yeah, you are black." I was just like, "What are you guys talking about?" And I held up a pencil. I held up a brown pencil. I said, "I'm this color. I'm brown." And they were looking at each other, all kind of confused. They were confused that, you know, I confounded them. This young child had confounded them. I had confounded the teacher even more that I had confounded the kids, because the kids just had accepted it as a label, but the teacher was thinking of it more. He was probably thinking, "Oh, this kid's probably going to be a problem," which I ended up being, kicked out of school and all of this because I didn't fit. But I remember I was the only student that was like, and eventually I was just like, "Okay, yeah, you're black, I'm white." Because I remember I held up a pit, because they said, "You're black," and I goes, "Look at this pencil. I'm brown. I'm brown. What are you talking about?" And I said, and they said, "No, you're black. You're black. I'm white." I goes, "You're not white." They goes, "Yeah, we are white." I goes, "You're pink." And I held up a pencil. I said, "Look, you're this color. You're pink." When we're drawing faces, and when we're drawing coloring in, you use pink. And they were confounded. So you could see the fact that they were confounded shows you what goes on at home. They were indoctrinated at home. "Look, kid, sit down. You're white, right?" "I'm not white, mommy and daddy. I use pink at home. I use pink at school when No, you're white." You know, you can just imagine some of these conversations which go on um, at home, and I can see it. I can see it even when even yesterday. I was coming out of a store. It was late at night. I was coming out of a store. No one was around, and I remember a bunch of kids walking towards me. This is not the first time this has happened. It was about 3 girls, 3 boys, and the girls started laughing. And I remember thinking to myself, back in the day, I used to think, why are these laughing? Like, there's nothing wrong with me. I checked my face before I went out. creamed my face and everything. I look fine. Why are they laughing? And I realized why they're laughing. The Bible says you will be a proverb and a byword. That the other nations will laugh at you. And they're not laughing at me per se, me, myself. They're laughing at what I represent. They're laughing at the status of the people that I represent. You know, nothing. Just and this is boldly in my face, boldly in my face, laughing until I say something like "you damn rats." You know, I'll say, "Oh, you damn rats," loud enough for them to hear, and then they'll kind of be taken back. Because sometimes you've got to give it back. You can't just, you know. But these people are bold. I was riding my bicycle. A guy said, "Hey." I looked across, and he put up his middle finger. Just laugh. But this is the thing. This is what we have to endure. These people are emboldened. And these are the same people that like to call a kettle black. You know, these are the same people that like to call. Uh, For example, let's look at what's happening in Russia, right? This is just brief commentary. The book is actually nearly finished. There's only a couple of pages left of the book. But like what's happening in Russia, right? So they move all of their equipment, all of their military equipment. When I say military equipment, I'm talking about equipment that is designed to kill, right? So they move all of their military equipment on the borders of the Russian people, right? Uh, and they don't see that as an aggressive move. They don't see that as posturing. They don't see that as posturing. And then when the Russians fight back or act in an aggressive way to retake that territory, they're looked at as, oh, look at these people, these monsters. They killed women, children, and you know, well, what have you been doing? What is the whole what was America founded on? What was America founded on? The blood of so-called black people that you labeled black, that even though they're not black, this is just a social construct. The people that you put on reservations, red, you call them red. When the Bible refers to the Edomite as red, the so-called white person is red. So you take their land, you put them on reservations, you put these people in holes, in ghettos. You fill their neighborhoods with guns and drugs and strong drink, and then and deprive them of a living wage, a good wage, you know. And then when they act out, look at them, look at these monsters. When you've created the whole environment that they're in. Let's get that scripture. So this is Habakkuk 2:15. Woe unto him that giveth his neighbor strong drink, that puttest thy bottle to him, and makest him drunken also, that thou mayest look on their nakedness. Do you see? So put guns and stuff in their neighborhoods, put drugs in their neighborhoods, put bad food in their neighborhood, put liquor in their neighborhoods, deprive them of jobs, and then let's see what happens. Gunfire, shooting, killing, madness, folly. And then you point at them and say, oh, look at them. Let's get that. Revelations 12 and 9. No, sorry, that's not the. Why am I in Revelations? Actually, no, wait. Bear with me while I get that scripture. Because this is what is happening with Russia. This is exactly what is happening with Russia. So that's Revelations 12 and 10. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now has come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Hamashiach. Hamashiach, I'm replacing that for Christ, which is there. For the accuser of our bedroom, for the accuser of our brethren is cast down. The accuser of our brethren, this is referring to Esau, or the so-called Edomite white race, which accused them before our Yahweh by Shem Yahushua day and night. So which accused them before our God day and night. Do you see that? So they create a situation, and then when someone acts on that situation, they completely discount their involvement in it, and then just focus on accuse them. Called the tribe of Gad Indians, which actually means savages, which actually means savage or savages. Um, so yeah, this person is these people are real hypocrites, even to their own brethren, even to their own brethren. So the Zog or the Zionists, they will even call other Edomites Goyim, which means cattle. So, and even the Russians are also Edomites. But the difference between the Russians and the Western Edomites is that the Russians are staunchly against certain ways of life. They're staunchly against androgyny, which is like all of this transgenderism. They're against androgyny. They're against homosexuality. They're against. I believe they're also against pedophilia as well. I don't think that's a big thing in Russia. I'm sure, obviously, it goes on, but they're against that, which are three big cornerstones to the Western Edomites. So they're at loggerheads. There are certain things that they can agree on. There are certain things in terms of the whole Novus Ordo Seclorum, which they do agree on. Let's say, for example, and in fact, I'm not even going to go into that, but there are certain things which they agree on. There are certain things which they will lie together, they will jointly lie about. But on those three subjects, which 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 is a big part of the Western Edomites doctrine, pedophilia, homosexuality, and transgenderism, they they can't see eye to eye, because the Russian family still has that whole. The Russians still have not even just the Russians, but that whole block over there. They have they still have the traditional family values. They still hold the traditional family values. So it's difficult for them to see eye to eye. One of the reasons which they still hold the traditional family values is that you still need the traditional unit. You still need the man, like the man and the woman still need each other, particularly financially. when you remove the need for financial um, coupling, I don't know the word, but I'm just going to say coupling. When you remove the need for financial coupling, you also grant a certain liberty to women, which I mean, women are they're like kids, so they're going to act out and they're going to rebel and they're going to lead that whole Sex in the City lifestyle. So Russia still, even though its economy is growing, it still leans. You know, you still need to have a full unit. The man and the woman still need to lean on each other, particularly if there's kids involved. It's just easier financially, to put it bluntly. And also, they're not bombarded with certain styles of television. They're not bombarded with certain styles of music. So it's easier for them to um, come together. Whereas if you just watch 10 minutes of Western TV or 10 minutes of Western advertising, you'll see why um, you'll just see why things are the way they are in the West. Um, but ultimately, this is the contention which the Most High has put on both sides for them to be able to come against each other. There has to be a staunch difference between um, the Eastern and the Western. So we're seeing it hotting up over there in Russia. Obviously, prophecies still need to take place, such as the mark of the beast. This is the major real prophecy which is going to kick things off. This is the real, which is going to kick things off. So we'll wait and see how developments go. But I digress. I'm going to get back to this reading. It's only a couple of pages left, and then I'll close out. So, but in contrast with the anti-black resentment mobilized by the Duke campaign, sovereign citizenship seems preoccupied with whiteness. The drama of equality versus inequality, central to both the rhetoric of the new social movements of the 1960s to 1970s and Winant's neo-fascism, is supplanted entirely in legal populism by the rhetoric of liberty versus slavery, a rhetoric in which whites, not people of color, occupy the position of the slaves longing for freedom. From this perspective, the language of sovereign citizenship is an analogue of the 19th century language of wage slavery. Historian David Rodiger argues that when 19th century white factory workers described their own conditions as slavery, they took up a rhetorical stance that allied them with black slaves, yet erased the crucial differences between wage labor and slave labor, substituting their own struggle for the abolitionist struggle. The rhetoric of sovereign citizenship similarly substitutes a narrative of white marginalization for non-white subordination. It is important, I think, to distinguish this nostalgic racism from the rhetoric of victimhood and Nietzschean resentment that political theorists Wendy Brown and William Connolly identify as characteristic of modern American politics. Some right-wing racial projects, such as David Duke's Association for the Advancement of White People and the heavily racialized backlashes against affirmation action and welfare as we know it, do carry with them an emotional valence of seething resentment, and some whites do seem obsessed with alternately mimicking and denouncing the racist demagogues that they believe to be leading the identity movements of subordinated people. Yeah, so they might say, oh, what might they say? They might say, oh, I'm Irish, so I suffered too. They might say, oh, my family didn't have slaves. They might say, you know how it is. They might, I've got black friends, whatever. You know how it is. I digress. But the main body of legal populists literature saves its hatred for the government, not misbegotten 14th Amendment citizens, whereas the far right, new right, and neoconservatives obsess about the wrongful development of special rights for others. The legal populists concentrate on their own very personal loss of citizenship, a citizenship that they, in fact, have never experienced. Yeah, because many so-called white people were left out of the inheritance, as the scripture says. Uh, Esau, his brethren, and his neighbor is destroyed, and he is not. So the Zog, or the Zionists, or the elite, or the so-called Jewish, the people that say that they are the Jews of the Bible, obviously are not. Um, they have a certain inheritance, which their brethren, Russians, Germans, English, Americans, they're the same people, but they don't share in that inheritance. They might water some down, they might water some money down, but they've kept the lion's share for themselves. Anyway, I digress. I'll continue. Their racism is let's go back. Their racism is aversive, pro-white rather than anti-black. Legal populism is a practice of those who are marginalized but not subordinated. It is primarily composed by and for people who are symbolically on the other side of power, yet outside the political and economic elite. A population that feels cheated out of a birthright it believes it has been promised. Yeah, so as I explained. It thus stages a direct claim to the loyalty of the American nation that cannot be made by non-white identities except through uh, indirect, torturous claims for equality. Whereas right-wing elites have political and economic power, and some red state voters have religious faith, legal populists have only their own fantasies of agency to fall back on. Conspiracy theorizing, the apocalyptic imagination, and legal populism compose, I think, a kind of pedagogy. Let's look at that word. Ped pedagogy. Pedagogy, the method and practice of teaching, especially as an academic subject or theoretical concept. So, in a sentence, the relationship between an applied linguistics and language pedagogy. So, let's go back up. I think kind of pedagogy for the marginalized. Those who are symbolically on the side of power yet materially disenfranchised, a population that has historically received the wages of whiteness and continues to seek what it believes it has been promised, even as the dream slides further into obscurity. So, conclusion. In 1996, when I first read the report of the San Francisco Chronicle about California State Senator Donald Rogers and his attempt to claim his white man's citizenship, my shock was in part one of recognition to his dying day, My paternal grandfather, a committed raceman, believed that the American moon landing was a hoax. Well, it was a hoax, perpetuated in order to cow the black man into submission. uh, oh gosh. I was also familiar from my own friends and family with the various conspiracy theories that run through African American communities. We don't listen. The whole moon thing was just another Cesare Borgia. It was just another Jesus Christ. It was just another Neil. It was just another. Who's the guy that rode the bicycle? Uh, rode the bicycle and won all those medals. It was just another falsehood. That's what it was. It was just another falsehood. It was just another thing which was to be uncovered. Um, as we know, Jesus Christ is not the name of the Messiah. His name is Yahweh Shai. The letter J didn't come about to 1524. White, that is not the race of these people. They are known as the Edomites. White, the whole white is a social construct. The word used as it is used today in terms of race came about in 1681. Before 1681, these people were not calling themselves white and were not calling Israelites black. So these are all, falsehoods. The moon landing, yes, another falsehood. Man has not been out into space. Satellites might have been out into space, but man has not been out into space. The highest man can go is lower Earth orbit. LEO, they call it LEO, lower Earth orbit. So, as a critical race theorist, I was used to understanding these theories as a form of populist resistance to racial dominance. How unsettling then to run across a wellspring of conspiracy theorizing colored white, taking the heart of American political culture as its starting point. Exactly. Uh, the white people did not start um, at the birth at their birth of America. White people did not start at Christopher Columbus. What links the marginalized but not subordinated with the marginalized and subordinated with whom critical race scholars are traditionally concerned is the work that Norman Spalding calls the Constitution as counter monument. As Spalding writes, the Reconstruction Amendments mark injustices that cannot be disowned. The mark injustices that cannot be disowned. Injustices opaquely but deliberately inscribed in the founding instrument itself. Injustices that are unavoidably American, inseverable from the national body, which is what they're trying to do now. They're trying to sever that history, uh, whether it means burning history books, taking whole teachings out of the school system, um, attacking the children early, attacking the children really early. By whatever means, if you've got to create a Disney cartoon which they all love, which is filled with subliminal messages, which reinforces our current doctrine and excludes the old ways of doctrinating the kids, so be it. Whatever you need to make that film or those films or those series, you've got the money for it. You've got the backing for it. Just get the minds behind it and do it quickly. This is their mentality. You've got a good idea. You've got good subliminals to get these 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 3-year-olds indoctrinated into our new ways of thinking, our transhumanism ways of thinking, our ways of um, look. What do you think? All right. So if a child that is 5-year-old 5 years old can give consent to an injection, right? So you send your child to school. Your child is 5 years old. They're giving out injections. Your child can write their scribbly signature, and they will accept that scribbly signature as consent for an injection. They have not called the parent or anything like that, but that child's scribbly signature is enough for them to be injected. This is what is going on. This is not false. I'm not making this up. This is what is going on. What do you think ultimately that is all about? Do you really think that's all about just an injection? No, of course not. Think about it. If your child can inject to something as obtrusive as an injection without finding out allergies or anything else or anything like that, if your child, a 5-year old, can consent to an injection, what else do you think they can consent to? Do you get it now? What else do you think they can consent to? I'm not even going to say anything. You can fill it in. They can, if they have enough. Do you see? Right. Okay. So let me continue. The legal populists are engaged in a similar struggle to keep visible the rupture in the constitutional text. The rupture not only between the old and new constitutions, but also between whiteness and Americanness. What keeps these two projects of counter-memory apart is their political valence, progressive versus reactionary, as well as their constituencies, subordinated versus marginalized. The anti-racists look forward in time to an imagined multicultural future. The populists look backward to an imagined monocultural past. The anti-racists are politically, economically, and culturally stigmatized by their identification with traditionally despised groups. Yeah, the reason why those people might have some kind of soft spot for those marginalized groups is because some of those people within that demographic will actually belong through bloodline to those groups. We call it, the Bible speaks about it, it's called the speckled bird. Israel was scattered to all four corners. So you're going to have some people that look like the other nations. Put it this way, the Bible doesn't deal with mixed race, half caste, or anything like that. You are who your father is, right? If you are who your father is, so like say if I'm from one of the dark tribes, when I say the dark tribes, I mean the dark skinned tribes. There's 3 of them: Judah, Levi, Benjamin. Let's say I'm from Judah. If I have a child with a Chinese woman, that child, what is that child going to look like? It's going to look kind of Chinese, right? But the Bible says that, let me get it. Let me get that scripture. Numbers 1 and 18. And they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the 2nd month, and they declared their pedigrees after their families by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward by their polls. Do you see that? They declared their pedigrees after their families by the house of their fathers. So your mother is just the seed. The seed comes from the father. There is no seed from the mother. The mother is an incubator. That is it. The seed actually comes from the father. So if you have an apple tree, if you have an apple seed or an orange or an orange seed or whatever kind of seed, it doesn't matter what kind of soil you plant that seed in, it's going to form whatever that seed is. The tree that forms, the tree that sprouts out, is not dependent on the soil, it's dependent on the seed. So, going back, if I have a baby with a Chinese woman, that baby is going to look kind of Chinese. But if I'm from the tribe of Judah, it doesn't matter if it looks kind of Chinese, it's still a Judite. Now, if that baby goes and has another baby, if that kid grows up and has a baby with a Chinese woman, what is that kid going to look like? It's going to look more Chinese. What is that? What is the bloodline? It's still a Judite. If that baby goes and has another baby with another Chinese woman, what is that baby going to look like? It's going to look even more Chinese. What is the bloodline? It's still a Judite. Do you get it? This is why the Bible says speckled bird. I'll continue. But politics and race are entwined for legal populism as for critical race theory. Whiteness and Americanness and their complex entwinement are simultaneously the marks of legal populism's marginalization and its centrality to American political culture, and the marks of critical race theory's disenfranchisement and its centrality to that same culture. Critical race and legal populism agree, then, if for very different reasons, on the legal and political significance of race. And although the marginalized and the subordinated visions of America are incompatible, the marginalized and subordinated share a commitment to the Constitution as counter-memory that the liberal center has often worked to avoid. If anything links my grandfather to Senator Rogers, it is their mutual recognition that the past is never really past, and that the past continues, other Americans waiting to be born. So let's read that last sentence. If anything links my grandfather to Senator Rogers, it is their mutual recognition that the past is never really the past, and that the past contains other Americans waiting to be born. If anything links the mutual. Okay, well, so that's the end of the book. Interesting read. Slightly apologist in some factors to the disenfranchisement of the today's so-called white male, and you saw that recently. Actually, there was a whole thing about a year ago. It kind of died down, but it was about this whole, the white male not having a voice, and it's similar to when you hear people say, there's a term, it's called first world problems. When someone complains and you say, oh, first world problems, it's basically saying that you haven't got it bad. You think you've got it bad, but you haven't got it bad. When you hear these Becky girls talking about, oh, my Starbucks lid was kind of torn. So as I was drinking my coffee, some of it was leaking over my nails. So I had to go into a McDonald's, and I hate going into McDonald's, and I had to wash my nails. And then you would say to them, first world problems, because you might be more grounded, and you may just live in a completely different world mentally, at least mentally. So when you hear some of these people talking about amendments and their rights, they still go back to very nice homes. They still have very nice cars. And even if they don't, they still enjoy a certain way of life. And then some people might say, "Oh, well, I know some white people, and they're not very well off." Yeah, well, you might do, um, but like I said, you will also find amongst a lot of those white people, so-called white people, that a lot of them will be speckled bird. A lot of them will actually be Israelites. I'm not saying all, but a lot of them will actually be Israelites. Uh, so that's yeah, it was an interesting book. It was an interesting book, very interesting read. Um, anyway, I'm gonna close out. Um, Barakatah Yahweh Hashem Yahushai, all praise to Yahweh Hashem Yahushai. Double honors to the apostles of Great Millstone. Peace and salutations to all the Akim, the bishops, elders. Shalom.